Good morning. My name is Lou LaCroix, Commander, American Legion Post 6 here in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Today I have Mr. Bob Glennon. He was born in October 13, 1967. He served in Operation Desert Shield and also a second tour in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He is a retired Master Sergeant from the United States Marine Corps. This is March 7th, 2009, Stevens Point, Wisconsin. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. Bob, a couple of questions here. When and where were you born?
I was born here in Stevens Point on October 13th, 1967. At that time, my parents had been married for just a few months, actually, and I ended up living in my grandparents' house on Briggs Street, not too far away from this public library.
Okay. And what were your siblings? Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I have one sister. She was born in Germany. My father, not long after I was born, my father joined the Air Force. We were stationed in Bitburg, Germany for approximately 4 years. My sister was born there in 1972. A few years down the road, my parents were divorced and my mother remarried, and I have 7 stepsisters and stepbrothers. So we have a rather large family now.
My goodness. What were you doing before you entered the service?
Going to high school, and that was about it. I actually enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve in November of 1984, and then went to boot camp. My first day of boot camp was June 6th of 1985.
And when did you take boot camp?
San Diego.
Okay. You said your father was in the Air Force?
Yes.
Any other members of your family that were served in this service?
My grandfather was a member of what is now the local National Guard artillery battery during World War II. At that time, it was a tank destroyer battery, and he served in Papua New Guinea and the Philippines during World War II, during their mobilization. My oldest stepbrother was a member of the National Guard unit here in Stevens Point after it became a National Guard unit, and that would have been in the late 1970s, I believe, when he served there.
Okay. You actually joined, you volunteered to go in the military, you weren't drafted?
Correct.
Okay. Why did you choose, A, to go into the service, and why the Marines?
Actually, I chose the reserves. I chose to enter the service to attain money for college, was really what it was. And the Marine Corps had, at that time, a slightly different program than the GI Bill. They would give you a $1,000 reimbursement toward your tuition. And I was going to go to college here at the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. Tuition was pretty inexpensive, and obviously living here at the time, I didn't have much for bills outside of, I didn't have a rent bill or a mortgage or anything like that. So I wasn't going to have to worry about those issues. And, well, also the Marine Corps had a reserve unit that was relatively close. It was Madison, Wisconsin. Okay. And I didn't feel like joining the National Guard, and I didn't see a whole lot of other reserve opportunities from the Army. So.
Okay. Now, how was your training? And did you take a specific job title while you were in the service, special training or?
Yes. Recruit training, even having spent my time during junior high and high school as a Boy Scout, learning field craft and all the other kinds of things that go along with being a Boy Scout and attaining my Eagle rank. Living in a single room barracks with 75 other 17 and 18-year-old young men was definitely a change, but got through boot camp without too many problems. It was definitely interesting. It's definitely a change in lifestyle in listening to others and living with that in that kind of community. I went immediately from recruit training to, at that time it was called Infantry Training School, now it's School of Infantry at Camp Pendleton, which is just north of San Diego. There I was trained as an 0351 and anti-tank assaultman. And my job entailed learning a brand new weapon system called the SMA, the shoulder-launched multi-purpose assault weapon. Basically, think of it like a bazooka from World War II. It's just an upgrade version of a bazooka. And also basic demolitions.
Was that anything like the law, the light anti-tank weapon?
I was trained on the law. The law was being phased out and the SMA was being brought in. Okay. It's more, it's a better anti-armor weapon.
Okay. Okay, you tell us a little bit about your wartime service in Desert Shield.
Desert Shield, we were mobilized at the beginning of December of 1990. By this time, obviously, the Iraqi forces had invaded Kuwait and had taken over. We had troops in the area who were on the border and were ensuring that no Iraqi forces were going to come south into Saudi Arabia. We did 30 days worth of training at Camp Pendleton, or I'm sorry, not Camp Pendleton, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. That 30 days of training was a lot of pre-work, basic infantry tactics, some rifle range time, some field firing time. Obviously, we were very concerned about the use of chemical weapons, so we did, everybody had to do at least one session in the gas chamber. One thing, at that time, I was the NBC NCO for the company, in addition to being the assault section leader. So that meant I spent the whole day in the gas chamber on gas chamber day, which was no fun. We flew over to Saudi Arabia on New Year's Eve, 1990. And arrived on New Year's Day, 1991. The two most memorable experiences of that flight were, number one, immediately upon takeoff, the battalion commander announced that the two aircraft, and we're talking 747 size aircraft, they were civilian airliners that we flew on, and we flew the whole battalion in one lift, two aircraft. The two aircraft were going to be no smoking flights. This is a rather long flight, approximately 18 hours. Many of us smoked at the time. Many of us still do. That didn't go over real well. Not about 10 or 15 minutes later, another announcement came over stating that the battalion commander had reconsidered, which probably means the battalion sergeant major told him he had made a mistake in that decision, and that the back 1/3 of each aircraft was going to be allowed for smoking. I think the planes spent the entire time to Brussels at a 45-degree angle because everybody was standing in the back. After that was memory number one. Memory number two was actually our time in Brussels. They wouldn't let us off the aircraft.
Excuse me.
And obviously being on the ground during refueling, there was no opportunity to use the bathroom or anything else on the airplane. So for approximately 2.5 hours while they refueled both aircraft, we sat on the tarmac and they were nice enough to start the generators and let us watch A Christmas Carol. To this day, I can't watch that movie because it's a bad experience. Very boring for 2.5 hours.
I'm sure it was.
Go ahead.
On your first tour over there, I don't want to bring up any bad memories or anything, but your duties on the front line and action witnessed, I'm sure you did see some action.
Actually, during Desert Shield and Desert Storm, we did not. We were, out of the 3 battalions in our regiment, 2 went to Saudi Arabia, 1 ended up going to the Philippines to backfill an active duty unit that was sent to Saudi Arabia. Oh, okay. Our 2 battalions from the regiment were in theater reserve and rear area security. So we spent the first 30 days or 40 days actually guarding the largest single ammunition supply point outside the United States. That was our company's mission. The other companies within our battalion had a different mission. Also guarding things, rear area security missions, making sure that Iraqi special forces weren't able to get to them. We were then pulled to a place called Ras Al Ghar, which is a Saudi Marine Corps base. I don't know how large of a Marine Corps they possibly have, but they do have some Saudi Marines. It's a Saudi Marine Corps base, and there we were conducting tactical training at the platoon and company level. We were there when Khafji was attacked by Iraqi forces. Immediately upon hearing that Khafji was attacked, we were told to pack our gear and stage for movement. We sat down on our packs on the road, waiting for the trucks to pick us up, and we stayed there for approximately 12 hours, sitting on our packs, cleaning our weapons, making sure everything was ready to go. In the end, we found out that the Arabian forces, or the coalition forces, were going to go into the town and retake the town. What we did find out, and I didn't find this out until 2004 or 2005 from one of the few officers that was still in the battalion from 1991. When Khafji was attacked, all American forces in Saudi Arabia had just been given their movement orders to stage for our movement forward a few days later when we actually started the ground offensive. So everybody, every American military unit in Saudi Arabia at that time was either already on the move and getting to its jump-off positions, or was getting ready to move and was involved. So the only American units that were not committed to doing something involving getting ready for their invasion of Kuwait and Iraq was our 2 battalions. So had the coalition forces not been successful in retaking Khafji, we were going to be the next ones to go.
Now that was Desert Shield, right, and Desert Storm?
That was Desert Shield and Desert Storm. There was one other thing that we did. We did move north after this, and we were put in a position near the border where we were going to be, again, a reserve unit held depending upon what would happen to the Marines forward of us. Excuse me. What we ended up doing when obviously the Iraqis, who had been beaten to a pulp by our air power for 30-some days, when the Iraqi units were surrendering en masse, they didn't have the logistic capability to move them from where they were surrendering to the prisoner of war holding areas, or the prisoner of war camps in Saudi Arabia in one straight lift. So they set up an interim camp at our location. We got in 7 days, or 9, was it 7 or 9? It's 7 or 9 days. We had over 900 Iraqi prisoners come in and out of our camp. Wow. They were arriving 2 or 3 times a day and being trucked out 2 or 3 times a day. And all we had was triple-strand concertina wire and engineer stakes, and Marines walking around throwing MREs at Iraqi soldiers to keep them fed. So.
I understand also that you were there again in 2005 for the elections, the first national elections in Iraq.
Yep. Actually, what I'd like to do is jump back real quick.
Oh, okay.
After we finished Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, we came home. I decided to stay as a member of the reserves. I had been in, by this time I had about 7 or 8 years in, and I was looking at, you know, it was fun. It was worth the money. I was definitely looking at a possibility of gaining some retirement money when I turned 60, so I decided I would stay in. We did a lot of good training in the 1990s and kept ourselves very busy. Even there's a lot of bad talk, obviously, about the Clinton years with the United States military, and there were some things that weren't that good. We did have to do good training with less money, less ammunition, and less facilities. But we were able to not only make do, but given the ingenuity of an all-volunteer military, the ingenuity of reservists who have special skills outside their military training, we were able to be very successful and create a military that was able to work very well in 2004 and 2005 when we as a battalion, but also in 2000 2003 when our active duty forces went into Iraq. So, yeah, and then I did serve in 2004 and 2005 for 7 months in Iraq. I don't remember much of that trip over. I think I got lucky. I got put in first class, being a gunnery sergeant, and also being a platoon commander, an enlisted platoon commander, and part of the quartering party that was being sent forward for our company. We actually ended up going with another company over to Iraq. There were extra seats in first class, and I got one of them. I think I slept most of the way. Although I do remember landing in Rhein-Main Air Base and thinking, wow, I lived about 40 miles from here for 4 years. Be nice to go back home and see what it looked like, what it looked like again. So we did arrive in Iraq safely and without any major issues. There was a interim stop for about a day and a half or 2 days in Kuwait, get acclimatized, make sure you have all your stuff, those kinds of things. Once that was done, we took a C-130 flight to Baghdad International Airport, which is ringed with small military bases, and those are ringed with Jersey barriers and Texas barriers, those large cement barriers that you can see in all the photos of Iraq. We spent a few days there waiting for the rest of the company to catch up with us, and then we were moved south approximately 12 miles to the city of Mahmudiyah, Iraq, which is in northern Babil province, just south of Baghdad, about 12 miles.
Okay.
So,
now, I'm sure, you know, living that close together with the, you know, the threat of action, friendships and camaraderie over there. Were you guys close?
Extremely close. In Mahmudiyah, the living conditions there were what we called hardback tents, which is really nothing more than they build a floor and they build a tent frame and then they throw the tent over the top of that. What we did do was around all the tents were sandbags. They're not actually sandbags, they're large, look like wire mesh containers, and they fill them with sand. I forget the exact names of those, but so they had sandbags, and then they built a sandbag roof or a sandbag ceiling inside the tents. So yes, you live, those are the living conditions. You live right in there day in, day out with people. We didn't spend too much time actually in Mahmudiyah at the main battalion camp. We were pretty quickly given a mission to relieve a company of active duty Marines on MSR Tampa, which is the main supply route, which is what MSR stands for, from Kuwait City to Baghdad, and it's also known as Iraqi Highway 1. So we went out and we split the company into two elements. Two platoons were at the large intersection just north of Mahmudiyah, large interchange area, which is called the Mixing Bowl because it looks like that. It's a very large interchange for getting off of Iraqi Highway 1 and onto Iraqi Highway 8, which look like interstate systems. And then the rest of the company, the most of weapons platoon, all of another platoon, and most of headquarters platoon was a few miles south on Highway 1 at one of the checkpoints. So we spent the next 30 days living under a bridge and on the highway, sleeping out under the stars on a cot, getting eaten by sand fleas in September. So you do get close to people because you see them day in and day out. There were no shower facilities. When you needed to use the head, there was a Vietnam version porta-john about 100 yards away with the pull-out 55-gallon cut-off drums that had to be burned daily. So yeah, you get to know everybody and things you don't want to know about them.
Yes, I'm sure. Unlike Vietnam veterans that we couldn't contact, we didn't have cell phones and all that. How did you stay in touch, and how often did you stay in touch with your wife or your family?
Staying in touch actually wasn't all that difficult. We had a satellite phone. We had opportunity. It was a company-level satellite phone, but the families had gotten together and purchased a phone card, basically, that plugged into it with time on it. So the Marines were able to make 10-minute phone calls home, not every night, but we were able to run the phone daily. We had hundreds and hundreds of minutes on this thing, on this time card. So the Marines were able to make phone calls home, probably by individual Marine standards every third or fourth day. They would be able to make a phone call home for about 10 minutes. Similarly, we did send people to Mama Dia on a daily basis, either on a food run or to get supplies or for something else. And we would rotate Marines through that as well. And on Mama Dia, there was an internet cafe, so they could get on and they could check emails, they could email their families, they could collect up emails. So.
Awesome. This is probably going to be a stupid question, but off-duty time, if any, what type of recreations was there available to you guys?
There wasn't a whole lot of off-duty time, unfortunately. I tend to, when you did have off-duty time, if you were in Mama Dia, you could go to the internet cafe, or you could watch television, because there were a few, there was a recreation tent with a television with a satellite TV, so you could go and watch television. If you were, when we were living on Tampa under the bridge, you slept, or you listened to your radio or an iPod or something like that, but you just tried to clear your mind and so on. After about 30 days of living under the bridge, we were tasked with going to one of the small villages south of Mama Dia, a village called Ludafia. The first thing that we had to do was go in and check the village out and see where we wanted to set up our company base. We did that. We found a nice building that was the right size. It was in a defensible position, and we were able to use that. It was actually the telephone exchange for the local area. So we kicked the workers out, took over the building, took over the other local buildings surrounding it, quickly had a bulldozer build a berm around us. So we had protection. We also had a parking lot for our company vehicles and an LZ to bring helicopters in without too many problems. This would have been mid to late October of 2004. We were able to move into Ludafia. By that time, now we had a better place to sleep. We had a roof over our heads. We were working on, we had electricity. It was intermittent because the local electricity wasn't very good, but there was a generator right out front. So when the electricity went out, you went out and you started the generator. So we were able to keep the electricity going most of the time, and Marines that had DVDs and laptops, we were able to watch movies and see what was going on. So.
Very good. Now at the time, when your tour, your second tour, well, either tour, was over with, especially your second tour, and you were coming home, how did they send you back in the same civilian aircraft?
Yes, yes. We coming home in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm was we went to Al Jabail Air Base. We got in a civilian type aircraft. We flew back to Camp Lejeune, spent about a week at Camp Lejeune, and then went home. Didn't do a whole lot of classes or anything else along the line there, and there wasn't a whole lot to it. We quickly returned to a drilling status. We had 2 parades that we did go to, one in Madison, that was a company parade, and then one in Chicago, which was a battalion level parade. So we did those. Coming home from Operation Iraqi Freedom was very similar but very different also in other ways. We went back up to Baghdad International Airport, stayed there for about 1 week. That was nice. You could start settling down a little bit. We then went back to Kuwait, the same air base that we transited in at, we transited out at. We were there for 3 or 4 days. Got back on a civilian aircraft, flew back to Camp Pendleton this time. And actually, I've completely glossed over the Camp Pendleton training, so remind me, we'll get back to that in a couple minutes. And then we'll also get back to some of the things that we experienced in Iraq, because I think we have plenty of time left in our time. Where was I? We arrived in Camp Pendleton. Camp Pendleton was very different. We had a lot of classes to go to. There were a lot of time set aside for the Marines to sit down and talk to people. In addition to just being checked out mentally, we were able to talk to doctors. We were able to talk to counselors. We had a lot of downtime, but there was a lot of time where there were people just walking around who you didn't really know who they were. They were in uniform, but they were Navy doctors. They were people who were just watching us and observing to see if there were going to be significant conflict. Because it is difficult to return from an environment where anytime you step outside the building to go to the porta-john, you run the risk of being wounded or killed in that simple movement,
right,
and back. Much less any time that you actively decide we are going to conduct a patrol, we are going to do a citywide roundup, we are going to move a supply convoy from point A to point B. Those kinds of things, you obviously accept risk. Those are military objectives that have to be accomplished. Well, using the bathroom has to be accomplished, or visiting your Marines standing post on top of the next building, that has to be accomplished also, but you don't normally think of the same level of risk when you're doing those. So those were really different. Getting back to our training at Camp Pendleton.
Yes, I was just going to ask about that.
Before going over to Iraq in 2004, we were mobilized at the beginning of June 2004, but we didn't fly to Iraq until early September. The training that we received in Camp Pendleton in 2004 was just significantly better than what we did in 1990. And I think we had learned some pretty good lessons, and we had decided that this was going to be a 1-year posting. It was 365 days, but it's 7 months in Iraq. So we're going to use 3 months of this time for pre-deployment training. And during that time, we did a lot of field firing. We did a lot of range work. We did a lot of cross-training. So a Marine rifleman whose job is to shoot, move, and communicate with an M16 or a light machine gun now also understood not only his M16 and his light machine gun, but he knew everything he had to know about a 9mm pistol. He knew everything he needed to know about an M240 medium machine gun. He knew everything he needed to know about driving a Humvee. He knew everything he needed to know about where's the safety clip on a mortar round so I can take it off if they need me to help out with the mortar section. They learned the M2 heavy machine gun and the Mark 19 fully automatic grenade launchers. So we did a lot of cross-training where Marines learned all the weapons that the battalion had that we could teach them. We also learned communications inside and out, 3 different radio systems. Everybody had to know 3 different radio systems inside and out. The SINGARS radio, which is a frequency hopping radio that is utilized in place of the old PRC 77s
Right.
and PRC 25s.
Right.
This is a frequency hopping radio, so conversations can be had completely in the clear because the radio hops frequencies 30 or 40 times a second. So there's no way to jam it, there's no way to hack it. It's all, unless you have the appropriate time coding on your radio, you can't talk to anybody, which is important because you need to talk to people. So you need to make sure that your radio is on time and it has the correct frequency fill. There was another smaller handheld radio that could work with both SINGARs and other radio systems. And then there was the ICOMs, which are similar to the small Motorola personal radios. So he had to learn 3 different radio systems, how to use them, what was a covered net or a frequency hopping net, and what was not, so you knew when to use certain procedures. We did a lot of tactical training, time out in the field, working on building clearing, working on movement from point A to point B in vehicles, getting out of vehicles, dealing with IEDs, dealing with down vehicles, whether that vehicle is down due to mechanical breakdown or whether that vehicle is down due to an IED. Mm-hmm. So we did a lot of pre-work training for 3 months, and that training was all run very, very well it was planned and organized well by our battalion staff, but it was also run very well by the active duty Marines at Camp Pendleton, who I don't think I ever heard them once say, "We're going to teach you reservists something." They completely ignored the fact. They knew we were reservists, but they completely ignored it, and we moved on and got the same training that any active duty battalion gets. So we did that. We then, like I said, in September, we went to Iraq. I mentioned that we were living under a bridge for 30 days. Then in October, we go to Ludifia. And our battalion made a decision. The battalion prior to us, which was an active duty Marine Corps battalion, did a great job where they were. But they didn't spend their 7 months just in Mahmudiyah. They came into Mahmudiyah and they were there for 2 or 3 months. And then the large action in Ramadi started to happen. So they got pulled out and were put in reserve for Ramadi. At that time, an Army unit came in and took over. Once Ramadi settled down, then 2-2, the Marine unit, came back down to Mahmudiyah. So they had learned the area, but then they had given it up. And then they had to come back in and kind of relearn the area. So they had their whole battalion located in Mahmudiyah at the main base there, where you had the chow hall, where you had the headquarters building, where we actually had a half battery of 155 artillery there, 3 guns in direct support of the battalion. But they did, aside from posting some guys out on Tampa to guard that road, they did everything from Mahmudiyah. So when they wanted to go out and do a visibility patrol in Ludifia, they had to move from Mahmudiyah 5 miles south to Ludifia, do the visibility patrol, and then return home. Sometimes they would spend more than 1 day there. They would spend 2, 3, 4 days. What would tend to happen, though, is as soon as 2-2 left and went back to Mahmudiyah, the insurgents would come back into town and would, as a show of their possession of the area, destroy whatever building it was that 2-2 had lived in while they were there. So there was a lot of level buildings when we showed up,
I'm sure.
and because they would literally blow the building up. Our battalion commander made the decision that that's not the right way to do it. He kept headquarters company and weapons company, headquarters company and echo company at Mahmudiyah, and most of weapons company actually. Echo company ran the city of Mahmudiyah, so it was a pretty large area. The city about the size of Stevens Point, so to give you an idea. Nice sized town, markets, everything, but Echo Company ran the city. So they did all their patrolling either on foot or on Humvees, and they would come out and they would run that area. We left 1 platoon on Tampa, and we took the other 3 platoons into Ludifia with us. And then Fox Company was sent at the end of September, about 2 weeks before we went to Ludifia. They went to a small town on the west side of the battalion's operating area called Yusufia. They actually had a few more gunfights than we had. Yusufia it's not on any main roads, unlike Ludifia and Mahmudiyah being on the intersection of Iraqi Highway 1 and Iraqi Highway 8. and Lutafia directly south on Iraqi Highway 8, you would think that these being on main roads would be the areas where the insurgents would want to operate. Yusufia is a little bit further west towards the river, and there's no major roads in that area. But what we didn't identify and what we very quickly learned was that Yusufia sat along the one decent road between Ramadi and Karbala that you didn't have to transit Baghdad and deal with all the Allied and coalition forces. So all the insurgents that were trying to run equipment or money or people or whatever between Ramadi and the western desert area and Karbala and the southern areas of Iraq would cut that corner and go through Yusufia. So Yusufia was pretty hotly contested, and I felt pretty bad for Fox Company because their first couple weeks there were very, very difficult. They had a lot of gunfights, and we were close enough in Lutafia that we could usually hear the artillery being fired in support of them, wow, or their own mortars firing in support. So now we're in Lutafia as a company, as Gulf Company, and we made the decision that we were going to patrol heavily, that we were going to be visible, and that we were going to own the town. And we did it. We made every effort to own that city, and we were very, very adamant about what was happening there. And as a battalion, we did that. We spread out so that you never knew where an American Marine Patrol was or what we were doing. And in fact, the insurgents had given us the nickname the Mad Ghosts. And I should have brought one of my coins along with me. I'll try and remember to bring one to the next Legion meeting for us. They called us the Mad Ghosts because they would be planting a roadside bomb somewhere, and they had checked out the area, and they'd worked in this area because they live in the area for many times, and all of a sudden they'd get rolled up on by 3 Humvees and taken into custody. We did a lot of operations looking for insurgents, not with the objective of killing bad guys and knocking down buildings, but actually with the objective of getting these people just off the street. Our battalion had approximately 1,100 Marines in it, plus some Army attachments to us at any given time. That was our minimum strength. Our maximum strength was higher because at one time we had 2 companies from the British Black Watch attached to us. Oh, yes. At one time we had 1 company of Strykers attached to us. Another time we had a platoon of Bradleys from the 1st Cavalry Division attached to us. So we had a lot of units roll in and out. And we also worked for a lot of different units while we were over there because units were rolling in and out. Remind me to get back to that also. It'll kind of explain some of my disagreements with the United States Army. Where was I? During our time in Iraq, our battalion rolled up, arrested, and sent to Abu Ghraib approximately 1,000 known insurgents. Our conviction rate, these are people that have been through the Iraqi court system and been convicted, was over 95%.
Fantastic. So,
I mean, we did an excellent job of rolling up bad guys. And it showed. It showed because by midwinter, and actually, yeah, right around early January, late December and early January, the insurgent activity in our area of Iraq had dropped off significantly, and insurgent activity around us had gained significantly, had grown. Much like a water balloon. When you squeeze a water balloon, the water goes somewhere. Well, we were squeezing the water balloon just south of Baghdad, so insurgent activity was growing. And you mentioned earlier that we were there for the national elections, right. And yes, we were. And that was a pretty amazing time because we knew the elections were coming up. The Iraqi people knew that the elections were coming up, and what ended up happening was After getting orders from higher headquarters, which at this time we were still working for 24th MU, 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit, we had gotten orders to find 2 places in our area as a company to hold the elections. Now, the other companies in the battalion were finding their own areas. I believe Fox Company only had to find 1, and Echo Company, I believe, had to find 3 in Mamadea. So we found 2 polling places, places where we could hold the elections, places where they were defendable, places where we could put the Iraqi soldiers that were working with us on a day-in, day-out basis to be the visible face of the security at the elections, and the Marines would be around them, covering them, making sure that the insurgents didn't get in close. When the Iraqi citizen came to vote in January of 2005, they would be seeing Iraqi soldiers guarding Iraqi pollsters who were then so they could vote for an Iraqi government. And we had this plan all laid out, and approximately 2 weeks before the elections, we find out that the interim government had decided that there would be no elections in northern Babil province, which is where we were, or in southern Baghdad province, which is we covered part of also, primarily due to the insurgent threat. Well, our battalion commander, a man I greatly respect, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Smith, just went absolutely livid. He had lost, by this time we had lost a good number of Marines. In our company we had lost 5. Well, 4 by this time were actually dead. 1 was seriously wounded in Germany. He ended up dying of his wounds later in 2005. By this time, the battalion had lost a number of Marines. We had done some pretty amazing things. We had rolled up 400 or 500 bad guys. Insurgent activity had dropped down significantly. And he wasn't going to stand for no elections in his area. So he got a hold of the MU commander, Colonel Johnson. Colonel Johnson and Lieutenant Colonel Smith went up to Baghdad, met with the interim Iraqi government, met with the multinational force commanders and the American commanders up there, and actually talked them into holding the elections in our area. Awesome. And his whole justification was, you cannot justify these elections and at the same time disenfranchise this large of the population. That's true. We were able to hold the elections, and we were very proud of that. So that was my big moment of fame in there, is being part of the Iraqi elections. We did continue operations after January. We continued things that we called our citywide roll-ups, where we would, about 4 a.m., we would roll into a community, part of Ludafia or part of one of the outlying small villages. We'd block off every road in, every road out, and we would go start knocking on doors. And every military-age male, age 15 to 55, was brought into a central location, asked what their name was, asked what they do for a living, find out exactly where they live, and work on that. And then we would compare their name to a master list of bad guy names, and we would send these people, we'd take those people, if they matched the name, and we would send them on up through the food chain, and many of them ended up in Abu Ghraib. So that was how we found bad guys, just sometimes by pure dumb luck. Roll up half a town and find 12.
There you go. So, now, what was this about the Army?
Oh, yes. No offense, Lou.
No problem.
No, like I said, we worked for a number of different units. When we started there, we worked for 24th MU, 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit. They then went home because their 7 months tour was done, and that was done right around the end of January. Okay. We then started working for the 1st Cavalry Division. We worked for the 2nd Brigade Combat Team. Great people to work for. Loved them. immensely as a reporting unit, or as a unit that we reported to. They came down, we would see their brigade commander very often. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he came down and visited our company FOB a number of times. Always, that was their second tour in Iraq, and that was also the second time that their tour had been extended from 12 months to 15. So they were definite veterans of the area. They were definite veterans of the conflict, and they definitely thought in many ways the same way we did, which was get the job done, be realistic about it, and don't do anything exceedingly stupid. Which unfortunately, when you're dealing with an insurgency and you do something, if you do something exceedingly stupid, you can do more harm than good.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and I don't, you know, your war in Vietnam being a little bit different, but you've probably also did see this. Sometimes it's better to just let them go and get them another day, rather than just start shooting stuff and hope you get them. Because if you get one insurgent today, great, but if you had to injure or kill 20 or 30 civilians in order to do it, it's too much bad blood.
Yeah.
You're going to get that bad guy eventually. You will, because he will make the right mistake at the right time, sometime. Just today's not the right time. Right. So, and 1st Cavalry Division understood this, and but they also understood how we operated as Marines, because we did operate a little bit differently. The last unit we reported to was the 3rd Infantry Division. I did not like working for the 3rd Infantry Division. Immediately upon taking over, now I do understand where they're coming from. They were coming into country immediately after the 2nd large battle for Ramadi had occurred. This one in early 2005, late 2004, and they had heard and seen while they were in the States all the bad press that came out of the use of weapons such as white phosphorus, red phosphorus, and so on. So we understood where they were coming from, but we still, we still didn't like the order, you are not allowed to use white phosphorus. Now, we used white phosphorus for our 60mm mortars and red phosphorus, which burns white. Don't ask me why they call it red, but they do. We used red phosphorus for our 81mm mortars as a marking round. Whenever we had a patrol that was out, if it called troops in contact, meaning it was being shot at by insurgents, and they asked for a fire mission with our mortars to impact those insurgents, we always fired the last round as a white phosphorus or red phosphorus round. The reason for that was when you called troops in contact over the radio, every aircraft in Iraq that had enough fuel to get there and help and still get home was on its way to help you out. Well, airplanes at 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 feet, they don't see the ground really well. So if you want to help them find the bad guy target, you put something out there that they can see. And it's very easy for them to see a white phosphorus round that's impacted the deck. And that's exactly what we used it for. That was the only reason why we used it, but it was SOP to fire the last round from the adjusting gun as a white phosphorus round. We explained this to the 3rd Infantry Division, and their immediate response was, not only did we tell you that you couldn't use it, we are now going to come down and take it, because you told us that you're probably going to disregard what we told you. So I didn't understand. I understood where they came from saying you can't use it for incendiary effect. And that was never our purpose of using it, even long before Ramadi occurred. Our purpose was always to use it for marking and identification of enemy positions for aircraft. But since they didn't like that, okay, colored my judgment on 3rd Infantry Division ever since.
Audie Murphy is turning in his grave.
He may very well be.
You're coming back into civilian life. a lot of Vietnam veterans, and I'm sure a lot of Iraqi veterans, Iraqi service veterans, find the transition from this tense, 24/7 tenseness to more or less basically solitude and silence coming back to the States. How were you able to adjust or readjust back into civilian life? I mean, into regular life.
I think being a reservist makes it easier in many ways, because your service as a reservist is a combination of being a civilian and being a member of the military. So you're not, unlike an active duty military member, you're not permanently in that lifestyle for however many years you serve. And I served 23 years. In that 23 years, I have 12 months of combat time. So it's not a whole lot out of 23 total years of service. And if you count up my days of serving for the Marine Corps, it doesn't add up to a whole lot. So my transition was pretty easy, but you are right. It can be difficult to come back and simply turn a switch. It isn't a light switch.
Right.
You can't come home and immediately be the same dad you were, the same husband you were, the same brother, or whatever it is. I still remember, for example, 2005 when immediately after I had come home, my wife and I took the kids to the fireworks show here for the 4th of July. And we were sitting in the park. It's dusk, sitting on a lawn chair, got wife on one side, kid on the other, kids on the youngest one's on the other side of the wife, and the fireworks are starting. Everything is fine. It's a neat fireworks show until they got to the finale.
Oh, yeah.
And then when the finale happened, all of a sudden my heart rate went up, my breathing got real shallow, and in my mind, I wasn't sitting in a park in central Wisconsin watching a fireworks show. I was on a flat roof in a hot, dusty place that I didn't want to be, with mortar rounds going off around me. Why? Because that's something I had experienced, and everything was the same. Now, 2 seconds later, when I looked around and I realized that, no, I wasn't in a hot, dusty, crappy place, and my wife was next to me, not Corporal Jones, the 81's FO, I was fine. But the adjustments are different. November of every year is a little bit tough. November is when we lost all the Marines from our company who were killed. The first 3, Ramey, O'Donnell, and Warrens, were killed on November 8th. They were in a Humvee that was destroyed by an IED. This IED happened to be a 500-pound airdropped bomb that was buried under a dirt road. That also seriously wounded my good friend Chad Simon. He was a staff sergeant. He was the one, it took about 1/4 of his skull and 1/3 of his brain mass, or the other way around. Either way, he was in a coma until he finally died in August of 2005. And then we lost Cantafio. PFC Cantafio was killed near the, I believe it was the 24th of November that year, in a gunfight up on the northern side of Mahmudia. So November's kind of a tough month for me, and it still is.
I understand that. Sure.
Yeah, it still is. Even though there's deer hunting, but that makes it kind of fun. So I can live with that. But adjusting back to civilian life, it wasn't that difficult for me, and there's still times, there's still things that happen. I remember driving to Marshfield some months ago. I was in my car, it was morning, it was just light, and as I'm driving, there's a semi coming toward me, and about the time that he got even with me, he had a blowout on one of his outer tires on the other side of the vehicle. That was a quick flashback too.
I'm sure it was.
So that was disturbing. But I got over that one.
Well, that's good.
I haven't had any significant issues.
I've noticed one thing. I'm not going to try to compare There is no comparison between the Vietnam and the Iraqi war, because war is war, no matter where you are.
Yeah.
But unlike servicemen coming back from Iran, Iraq and Afghanistan, Bosnia and all that, like you said earlier, you had a chance to go to, we'll say Rhineman or something like that, for, I would call it, in our day, we call it a stand down, kind of getting back to the civilian. When we came back from Vietnam, we went straight to Chicago, down to Dick's, and home.
Yeah.
So it was a little rougher. But your reflections on your duties in the service, your service to your country, which we are totally grateful for. I'm sure, well, you've already explained that it has, at times, affected your life. This is probably a rough question, but I'm sure you can answer this. Did you learn, were there any life lessons learned from your military experiences?
Yeah, I wake up every morning and I'm just glad to be here.
That you share with millions of other veterans.
In the long run, the biggest life lesson is simply that life, no matter whose it is precious, and you've got to safeguard it. And there are bad people in the world, and there are bad people that need to not be in the world anymore.
Right.
And it's okay to deal with them in an appropriate manner, but it's not okay to make the big mistakes, like I was saying earlier, and say impact those who have no fault in the situation. My experiences, it's something I would never want to repeat. But I don't want to give them up.
Well, Bob, for 74,000 American Legion veterans and the 1.3 million Legion members in the United States, I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
This will now conclude our interview, and thank you very much for watching.